But AI is such a powerful writing partner, research partner, writing tool, editor. How can I leverage it, effectively and ethically? I've said that increasingly, these LLMs are the writers and the humans are the editors. I think our job as human beings um, is to bring the heart, and the emotion and the human lived experience. I do feel like there's a way to leverage an LLM to be a better editor, and I just haven't figured that out yet. And then, are there things that are features versus bugs? They're not user error, and they're never going to be soluble by a limited intelligence LLM. Uh, and then, of course, there's this idea of AI and general intelligence, and I don't even think I have any conception of what that's going to be like. What is it going to be like to interact with a machine that's just not just better memory and knows more than me? That's what we have today.
Welcome back, AI Explorers, to another episode. Today, we're going to talk to Dan Grech, who is the founder and CEO of BizHack Academy. It's an award-winning organization specializing in AI-powered marketing training for small businesses. Dan has a career that spans over 2 decades. He transitioned from Pulitzer Prize-winning journalism for NBR and PBS to a leading educator and entrepreneur in digital marketing. He has trained thousands of business owners and marketers on how to leverage the power of AI and storytelling to grow their brands. In addition to leading BizHack, Dan is a sought-after public speaker, having presented at industry conferences, webinars, and podcasts such as The Shrimp Take and Local News Matters. He holds 2 master's degrees, was a Fulbright scholar, and has taught at institutions like Princeton and Columbia. Dan, we are so excited to speak with you. We're so glad that you're here with us today.
Well, we are extremely interested in talking about keeping the human component an integral part of the AI usage. So that lines up with what we've been doing and what we've tried to focus on ourselves.
But Warren, and I am and then the other piece that's kind of obsessing me right now is how to properly use AI in the writing and editing process, and some of the techniques that I'm developing and searching for. And you guys could probably teach me a thing or two about some of the tricks of the trade that you've learned. So anyway, if that gives us plenty to talk about, and
I think more than enough.
Yeah, happy. But sort of the topic of the business story and how AI can't replace you, but can help you write it and get loud about it. And then second is just how to leverage AI like responsibly as a writer. Like I'm on a book contract, and so I want to. This has to be my words. You know what I mean? That's sort of what they're paying for. But AI is such a powerful writing partner, research partner, writing tool, editor. How can I leverage it, effectively and ethically?
Have they told you, like, is that part of your contract that it can't be written by AI, that it's got to be you, or?
It's not addressed. It's still too new. The book publishers haven't caught up, I don't think yet. Like I actually added some language in the contract just related to AI, just to have it on the table because it wasn't in the standard contract yet. And I think that's rapidly changing. Like the Authors Guild, there's like a new certification called human authored that they're starting to that they've created. A lot of the concerns that we're hearing right now with AI from creatives is they take my creative work, they use it as part of their training materials without my permission, and then it can make a good Sarah Silverman joke, right? And so Sarah Silverman sues OpenAI and ChatGPT for that. I think there's this other conversation that I have not seen, which is if you yourself are a creative, I haven't seen as much of it. If you yourself are a creative, how do you responsibly ethically, leverage AI as a creative partner, so that when you put your name on the work, it's still accurate. And this even has IP considerations, like, you know, one of the things that's required for a copyright is that it be human authored. So you can't copyright the output of ChatGPT. It's just that the definition of copyright in the law today is that a human being wrote it. And that makes a ton of sense. And it's an interesting kind of, so how much human writing is written by a human? If you're doing the prompt engineering, is that human written? If you're feeding it a knowledge base of materials and then it's deriving material from that, is that human written? I think those questions are really live for, both in a legal and ethical framework for writers and other creatives.
So I'm a lawyer, and this is something that I'm pretty interested in. So in the statute, there's no like explicit requirement that it be human authored. So that's coming out of the Copyright Office saying that. So for example, there are decisions. For example, there was a photographer that had set up a camera for a monkey to click the button. And then PETA sued and said, well, the monkey has the copyright. And then, of course, the Copyright Office came back and said, no, the photographer, the monkey can't have copyright. So those non-human author decisions don't come from the statute itself, but from case law. And it's interesting how you talk about it, because if you're like a performance artist and you plan to, for example, I don't know, you just throw some canvases out and you release some dogs with finger paints and they step through it and step all over the canvas, you're the author, even though the dogs are the ones that did all the painting, right? Like that seems pretty clear as far as we've understood art in the past. And so I know that you want to focus. I know you want to focus on the storytelling piece, so I don't want to distract us. But that is a fascinating topic to me in terms of like, by setting it up, like to what extent do you have to set it up to be the author? Or is OpenAI the author of all of these things since they've created the machine? Or is it mine only if I use a custom GPT that I've made versus using the general tool? There's a lot of just what ifs, and this is why people hate lawyers. So let's talk about storytelling. One of the things I wanted to ask you is GPT-5 just came out, and you were talking about using it for writing. And have you noticed a difference between GPT-4, GPT-5, and writing? I know it's only been like less than a week since GPT-5 is out. And so have you noticed a difference in its ability to help you write or not write?
So yes, I have. I think it's improved from GPT-4. And what I haven't done yet is the analysis of Claude 4 Sonnet compared to GPT-5. So here's like just like a really important larger insight. There are different companies, right, that are creating these large language models, these chatbots. Obviously, OpenAI and ChatGPT is the most well-known, but Grok and Claude and Gemini are all competing with ChatGPT for primacy. And it's a really complicated question to ask, what's the best LLM or chatbot writer? Because first of all, there are different companies, and each of those companies have different models, and each model is a different quality writer. And so every time a new model comes out, you need to like go and retest it and see if it's now a better writer than the competition. That's a time-consuming thing to do. The way I do it is you just put the same prompt in to both and just look at the output. And when I did that earlier this year, Claude was the clear winner. So much so that I actually got a subscription to Claude and plan to write my book in Claude, or to leverage Claude for helping me write my book. And so use Claude as my writing partner. GPT-5 complicates the question because now my analysis was with the previous LLM. And so, because I'm in the early stages of the book writing process, I'm probably going to do the analysis again. I haven't yet, but in my early testing, when I just compared the responses of analyzing a transcript between GPT-4.1 and GPT-4.5 and GPT-5, GPT-5 was significantly better at writing and analysis.
Is there one that's better at, like, say, creative writing versus, in your tests, creative writing versus more technical writing, or is it just kind of?
Yeah, Claude um was the best writer for me. I had heard this a lot, and I was like, well, GPT is doing great work, it's good enough for me. And then I was doing some client work where, the work that I do is, or the work I specialize in doing, I should say, is helping document the business story for a company. Leveraging, I have a 20-year journalistic background. So leveraging all of the skills that I learned when working at NPR and PBS and the Washington Post, and then using those to help reflect the story of a business's founding and why they do what they do and why it matters. And I was doing that for a client, and I on a bit of a whim, I decided to try to take the same prompts and write them in Claude, and the output was so much better. I was convinced, to actually buy a subscription to Claude and use that as my primary writing partner for my client work.
Having tested some content myself on Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude, ChatGPT and Claude were definitely the better results for me. Gemini struggled with a number of things and was it wasn't as creative per se. But then again, it comes down to what Jacob and I have talked to with a lot of people is the humans are the experts, and we're the ones that determine if the content that is sent to us or that is generated is good or good enough, right? And what are your thoughts on that? Human is the expert and bringing, I mean, you're obviously writing this book, so you're the expert in that particular area. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So the technical term for this question is the human in the loop, right? Like, and the metaphor that I like to think about when I think about this is it's like an assembly line. Like we hear a lot about LLMs and chatbots, and we're also increasingly hearing, and I think we're going to hear more and more about agents. So to me, a custom GPT or an LLM trained to do a certain task is like a really smart worker, right? They could be a researcher. They could know how to write in a certain tone and style. They could be, they could be an expert in, act as a top graphic design consultant, or act as, the best marketer in the world. And they can then be that thing. So that's like the individual worker. And then the agent is like an assembly line. It's like lining up a couple different tools. Sometimes they're going to even be in different platforms. Like you might use, I find Gemini's deep research really, really good. Gemini is Google's platform. Not surprisingly, it's really good at research. So I'll use, like, for deep research queries, rather than using ChatGPT, I'll use Gemini. So it might be like, have Gemini do the deep research, have ChatGPT 5 do the analysis, and have Claude do the writing, right? So it's like three different writers. You have a researcher, you have a analyst, and you have a copywriter, right? And in a big company, that's like how you do it. And so an agent lines them up. And then the question you're asking is, where's the human in the loop? In other words, what role does the human play uniquely? And obviously, there's one role, which is like editing and discernment. I've said that increasingly, these LLMs are the writers and the humans are the editors. Another way of thinking about that is increasingly, these LLMs are the coders and the humans are the architects and debuggers, right? So it's kind of that higher level thing. I want to say that this kind of editing architecture role, ChatGPT is getting, or the LLMs are getting increasingly good at that. And I wouldn't be surprised if And already in coding, we're seeing this, like that human editorial function is going to is starting to be taken over also by the AI and the LLMs. But the one area that I think is uniquely human um, are your lived experiences, the anecdotes from your life, and your personal insights, your basically the hard-won learnings from a lifetime lived about how to do things well, how to do. And so those two things, personal stories from your life and insights from your work, I see those as uniquely human. And it's those two elements, and there are probably a few others I haven't thought of, where you want the human in the loop, injecting that insight. And just to give you like a really concrete example, I have found um, LLMs like Claude are really good at drafting, doing first drafts, but they struggle a lot on how to edit it to make it better. And I have like, man, I have struggled so much with this. And any tips you guys can give me on how to turn an LLM into a better editor, I would welcome. But I think it's this like attempt to please, like whatever you ask it to do, it will just tell you to do more of that. And then you're like, no, 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 I want it more like this. And then it'll tell you the opposite. It doesn't have any conviction. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times you'll ask it for like advice on a piece of writing where it's like a 50-50 call. And I mean, I'll give you a really concrete example. I hired a thing I didn't even know existed, but I hired, as a part of my human in the loop process, I hired a developmental editor. A developmental editor is like a publishing term. So I'm writing a book and I'm drafting this book, and I wanted an editor. And people would say, well, ChatGPT can be your editor. I'm like, well, not really, because I just want another human being to bounce these ideas off of. And she has 30 years of discernment and knowledge about writing. And so I was asking her, basically, should I flip the order of chapters 1, 2, and 3 and make it 2, 3, 1? And it was like a very close call, like 49-51, you know. And together we decided to just do the flip and have it be chapter 2, 3, 1 instead of the current structure of 1, 2, 3. And when I did the same request to Chat GPT, or Claude, I should say, um, it just wasn't as helpful, because it just gave me almost whatever. It kind of mirrored back to me the advice it thought I wanted to hear,
Yeah.
and the analysis just wasn't as useful. Like when you need to make that call, humans are still better at that.
And I think it speaks directly to what you were saying, earlier about having that human intuition, the human experience. ChatGPT, Claude, they can't walk a street and feel what's going on. They don't have that emotional connection to any of this. And it speaks directly to story. That's what makes stories good, because we have an emotional connection to them. Just like you're talking about a founder story or this business's story, it's those emotional connections that the LLMs don't really understand that nuance as well, and why you would want to make that switch in your book, per se. Is this better here, or is this? It's just looking at it in a data perspective and saying, oh, well, these are predictively in a good order, and it's just going to go with what it predicts. It doesn't have that emotion to back it up, where we do, like with the lived experiences and what that intuition tells us.
Yeah. There's a technical term for what you're describing here, which is the stochastic parrot. Stochastic just means random, and parrot means like echoing or repeating or mirroring what we say. And they basically have described at least large language models as they currently exist as kind of parrots or echoes of just everything ever that's ever been put down on the page by a human. It's remarkable how human sounding these echoes are, these parrots are. But it's the Tin Man, right? All head, no heart. And so, I think our job as human beings um, is to bring the heart, and the emotion and the human lived experience.
I like what you're saying because I do think this is a word of caution for people who don't perhaps use these tools as extensively as maybe we do, because it's one of those things you learn over time. You may not realize that, like, oh, this is not a good decision maker, right? Like, it's trying to please me and make me happy. It's not trying to help me get to a decision. And I think that sometimes when people are new to these tools, they're like, oh, well, it knows. It doesn't know, right? Like, and so one of the things that we have talked to with everyone we've interviewed throughout the year this year has been, oh, yes, you need a human in the loop, right? You need humans making these decisions. I do think that that's important and key. And I like how you're saying that. I really like the heart, right? That's what humans bring. I think nowhere is that more apparent than in storytelling. So you have a long career in storytelling before AI, and that's where we've noticed people tend to excel with AI is when they have some other area of expertise. So how does that storytelling background help you magnify AI, or how has AI helped you magnify your ability to tell stories?
I think there's two aspects to my background that are really helpful, and they're helpful in different ways. And the first is, the 15 years I spent as a professional journalist. Because if you look at there are a lot of different flavors of journalists. Like, some journalists will dig deep into documents and do data analysis. They're almost like historians or analysts. The kind of journalist that I was the kind of journalist that, went out into the street and interviewed randoms about the topic of the moment. I mean, I'll never forget, there was a boat that capsized. I was in Miami working for the Miami Herald, and um, a bunch of people nearly drowned, and they were all at the Jackson Memorial Hospital emergency room. And I, snuck into the emergency room and interviewed on their sick beds these patients who had just been in this horrible boat accident. And that's the kind of reporting I did. I went to the southern border between Mexico and Guatemala. I made a real point of interviewing, folks that were generally voiceless and didn't have a lot written about them. And that was sort of the work that I did. That journalistic work is a necessary human in the loop from an AI perspective, right? Because if it's not been written down, AI doesn't have it in its brain. And these are stories and anecdotes and life experiences that hadn't been written down. Also, if it just happened, it hasn't been written down. So that's the journalism side. And so I've always been curious when I moved over the last decade into the business realm, and I started working with small businesses and founders on their marketing and storytelling. I always was really curious. Well, why did this person start this business? And I often found the answer to that question that was written up in their About Us page, if they even had one, was super inadequate to the actual story. And this is where the second part comes in, which is storytelling. So I went to school and studied. Who knew that you could actually get a degree, a master's degree in studying storytelling? But I did. And I studied, what are the eternal structures of story? And many of us have heard about, the hero's journey, which was kind of came out of mythology studies and a guy named Joseph Campbell, but he was pretty obscure until George Lucas used him to write Star Wars. And then now everybody, there's probably the best book on storytelling in marketing is Story Brand by Donald Miller. And it's, a light rehashing Yeah, it's a great book, and so there's that second piece, right, which is storytelling. Um, AI knows the theory of storytelling. The way I think about it is the structure of a story is like the bones, like the skeleton, but it's the flesh that makes each of us unique. And that is also, I believe, a pretty human process, right? Like it can mimic it, it can create a compelling story, but it's not your story. It's not the story that you would tell in your way, because that's kind of unique and imprinted by you.
I like that a lot because, again, everyone we've talked to has emphasized this year, despite the fact they told us. One of our interviewees told us at the beginning of the year, you're going to hear a lot about agents this year, which we've been hearing a lot about, obviously. Uh, but the need for a human in the loop. Um, as we've used AI, I recently saw a study, and it was areas where AI is kind of replacing. So it talked about careers where AI is just wholesale, those careers might be gone versus where AI is an augmenter. And definitely heavily leaning towards the augmenter side. Like a lot of people are concerned today, and rightfully so. What if AI makes my job go away? That's going to happen. But I think that there's a lot to be excited about. A large number of careers are on the augmentation side, and I honestly, where there is opportunity for storytelling, for experience, for physical, really just life experience, helps the decision making process in a way that a computer or a robot can't. Um, why why do you think that is? Why do you think that this human element kind of maybe protects those jobs or helps?
I just want to caveat that I don't know if you have this double consciousness as we have this conversation. Like, is what we're saying true today, but not like tomorrow as the models get better? Is
I've
what we're
wondered that.
saying
Yeah.
actually what we're saying more or less user error? Like, is it just that we're not really sophisticated prompt engineers and there's some techniques that we haven't yet figured out that would actually solve for a lot of these issues? I do feel like there's a way to leverage an LLM to be a better editor, and I just haven't figured that out yet. And then, are there things that are features versus bugs? They're not user error, and they're never going to be soluble by a limited intelligence LLM. Uh, and then, of course, there's this idea of AI and general intelligence, and I don't even think I have any conception of what that's going to be like. What is it going to be like to interact with a machine that's just way not just better memory and knows more than me? That's what we have today, but is like just smarter in almost every way than I am. Um, so anyway, all that caveated, I think a lot about this question for two reasons. One, like how am I going to keep myself relevant? And how am I going to build a future-proof business? And how am I going to write a book that won't age quickly or look really quaint? Um, there's this great author, Ryan Halliday. He's really well known for, his popularization of like Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics. And he's a former marketer at American Apparel, but he wrote this book that I find really inspiring called Perennial Seller. And he said, how do you write a book that's going to last 10 years, 100 years, that's going to continue to sell beyond whatever the hype cycle or the fad or the trend of the moment is? And so I do believe, and this is the one area that I probably thought about most, that human experience and personal anecdotes and insights drawn from 30 years doing something, that kind of 10,000 hours deep expertise, those feel like areas that we can safely say are going to be perennial, are going to be timeless. Human beings are never going to stop connecting over shared story. I mean, that's where we started, in storytelling cultures over fires and caves, and it will be a permanent feature of how we interact and how we do business. We do business with people we like and we trust. And there are lots of different ways to build liking and trusting, but the fastest is through shared experience.
Definitely like the story undertone, because you look at story throughout, where you're talking about in a cave by a fire, and they recently showed that, the cave drawings were animated. So if you have a torch, you can run it up and down, and the antelope's head will rise and fall on those walls because of the way they drew it. And so just the tools of how we tell stories have improved. I mean, I started doing marketing and design when Macs were, the Jolly Rancher looking things, and there wasn't a lot of capabilities to Photoshop, or InDesign was brand new. And now we have these amazing tools like AI that can generate videos, that can generate images, that can generate copy for us. So our tools for telling those stories have just improved. What do you think about that particular concept? You're obviously using AI to improve your storytelling. What does it mean for you to do that, and for others in this business, in these types of business, to use these tools to augment their storytelling?
So, Warren, you're probably in the top, let's just say 5% of all graphic designers and visual, marketers. And I would say I'm similarly in the top 5% of writers. And I still think that you're a better designer, and you have a better eye and better discernment than, an LLM like ChatGPT or using Canva. But for the 95% of the rest of them, and the same is true for me in writing, but for the 95% of, business owners, who don't have the training you do, don't have the experience you do, actually ChatGPT and Canva are going to be better than they are. And so this to me means, like, when you're operating at the highest levels of your profession, the way you interact with the tools are different than if you're the 95%. So I generally work with the 95%. And they hire me because I can do things that they could never do on their own. Because they don't even know what to ask. They don't know, they don't have that experience, or that, they would never be able to write their business story in the way that I would, because you just can't replicate through self-prompting, 25 years of experience. And so that's why us folks who are operating in that 5%, are going to have jobs for the foreseeable future. So just speaking to the 5%, like, you got to lean into that 5%. Like, you got to find a way to leverage AI to get yourself in the top 1% or the top 0.5%. Like, that might be what it takes to survive. Is you have to be not just among the best, but the best. And the only way that I think that you can do that is by just making that your one thing and eliminating other things. So I'm right now in the process of bringing in a partner to my business, BizHack Academy, which is an AI marketing training company, because I really need to take all of my energy and focus into becoming in the top 1% at the thing that I do better than anybody already. And then for everything else that's not your one thing, just be very thankful that AI exists to help you be better at it than you could be on your own.
I like that. I love that.
So true. Yeah, it brings to mind, when I was in college preparing for my marketing degree and my minor in graphic design and those kind of things, desktop publishing, exploded. And they're like, oh, designers will be gone because everybody will be able to do it on their own. And just as you've said, not the case, really, because there are certain skills that you've learned, and that one thing, or those few things that you've really put a lot of time and effort into, allow you to be better than that 95% who are using, today's analogy would be Canva and the LLMs. But so how are you, finding those individuals that you can help augment their stories and help them rise from that 95% maybe to that 5%? What does it look like for you and your company to elevate them and their use of AI?
My goal is definitely not to get your average business owner um, into the 5%. Um, Rather, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to educate them in all of our training and the consulting I do in the power of a business story across four elements of their business. The first and most obvious is revenue, marketing, and sales. How to powerfully articulate what you do and why you do it and why it matters in a marketing and sales context. That'll drive revenue. That'll accelerate closes and increase conversion rates. Because again, people do business with people they like and trust. But the second dimension is hiring, recruiting, and retention. So if you articulate your core purpose and your core values and hire based on them, you're going to hire better people and they're going to be more loyal to you. The third is about building community. All of those relationships that you have with people in your community, with your vendors, with your business partners, all of that. If you look at why VCs fund startups, there are two reasons: the founding team and the idea, right? So the team and why they do what they do and why you believe they're never going to give up and they're going to just stick with it until they find the product market fit. That's mostly what these VCs are investing in. So that's kind of that third piece. And then the fourth piece is just mental mindset and resilience of the founder themselves. Like, to run a business is a very jagged, up and down activity. And how do you sustain yourself through the lows?
It's like hit
Knowing
workouts
why
that
you know
are
what you do.
distributed with nothing in between.
I love that analogy, by the way, of the workout, right? Like, I think of it as like, in that moment when you're in a workout class and you're just like, I am done. There's just no way. I call that the joy point. It's like right when you're ready to give up, you somehow find the fortitude to just push through. And then you get through that moment, and then the rest becomes easier. And then you finish the class elated, with the sense of accomplishment. Like, that to me is like a microcosm both of learning and the entrepreneurial journey. And those dips are really low sometimes.
Yeah.
And you have to just find a way to push through. And one of the ways to push through is just remind yourself, why you're doing this.
So is that the why? Is that a big piece of the story? Because when I think about ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini and its responses, there's no why behind it except for the fact that it's been prompted, right? Like, humans, though, need why. So what are your thoughts on that?
That's a brilliant insight. I hadn't thought of that, but you're exactly right. Like, one of the purely human elements is your why. And there's two reasons for this. One, you're right. Like, AI doesn't have a why. An AI is sort of built to be like a really docile employee that like takes a task and does it. And
Yeah, if you
then,
tell it you're for performed poorly, it'll just apologize to you and get back to work. It's funny.
yeah, and you can train it to be really critical and to be really, like to find holes in it and so forth. So you can train it to do whatever you want, but in the end, it's still like a call and response. Whereas human beings, I call CEOs chief energy officers. And what is the source energy? Like, what is driving them? Right? That question of drive, the whole book, Driven, um, that is about human psychology and personal history, and that is also uniquely human. So our why is uniquely human. Just the phenomenon of the why, and then of course our why, our individual why, are uniquely ours. And this is the word unique is kind of thrown around in marketing in a way that I find really frustrating, like unique value proposition or unique selling proposition. And I'm like, oh my God, it breaks your brain to think of how you're quote unique, and then how to articulate that in a way that would actually sound like meaningful to a customer. But there is one thing that is effortlessly unique, which is our story and our why. It's by definition unique. And
No
there's
one's
one key
life is like
concept.
any others.
Yeah, I'd love for you guys to reflect on the idea of authenticity, right? Because I do feel like we need to talk about authenticity. Um, One thing I've noticed, like as a marketer, is sometimes the most successful, content online, um, is the rawest. It's handheld video, and it's not like highly produced, and and what it often has is sort of it's authentic. And I'm curious what you've observed about the importance in the mix of authenticity, kind of speaking truthfully from a place, of truth and personal meaning.
Authenticity is definitely an interesting topic. It's somewhat become, for me, in some locations, kind of a buzzword where they're like, "Oh, I'm authentic," and you're like, "Are you really though? Are you really?" And
Mm.
just as
When you look
just
like
as you're
everyone
saying,
else and post
yeah, exactly.
videos and say the same profound things.
Yeah, and like what you're saying with the the raw video, the lesser than the studio lighting, and those kind of things, is that authentic, or they just did they kid it out that way? And finding that authenticity is a uniquely human thing for sure. As we were talking about AI, it's just going to regurgitate what it's been trained on, and how can we make what we, that story that you're talking about, the authentic nature of, why am I doing this? How can I bring this to light? What is the passion that's driving me to do it? And create this service or product or whatever it is, and how can we drive that authenticity? So, it's, for me, it's how do I find authenticity without being that buzzword, especially as a marketer in today's environment, so that we can be authentic but not be authentic.
Thank you for sharing that. I wasn't aware that authentic was becoming, if you just like the word unique, like marketers destroy all beautiful things in this world. I stop.
God.
I say this as a
quote of the
recovering
day.
marketer.
Marketers destroy all beautiful things in the world. Thanks you for that, Dan.
It's like it's all about like positioning and driving revenue and prompting engagement. No, dude, it's about two human beings connecting over.
Right.
Yep.
That's what this is about. Like I do feel like that gets lost, and you're absolutely right. Like authenticity is a buzzword, certainly on social media.
Yeah.
Even so podcasting, right? Like we're talking on a podcast. I don't know if you saw, but there are two types of podcasts broadly. There are podcasts where the host is the hero, and there are podcasts where the story is the hero, right? So we recently saw is that Amazon dismantled a division that they had purchased called Wondery, and Wondery had podcasts that were like more story based. Think Radio Lab or This American Life, where this sort of the story and the topic was the hero. And they're moving now more towards personality driven podcasts where the host, Tim Ferriss or Dax Shepard or fill in the blank, is the hero, and that kind of reason people tune in. Howard Stern is kind of the classic, and Rush Limbaugh. And so the reason I bring this up is, we're moving increasingly into a world where it's really like people attach themselves to authentic personalities, whether it's a comedian or a podcast host, and that's what they're really looking for. And so, how do you do that in a systematic way? And how do you do that to help in support of growing your business, both in terms of attracting new clients and also building a team? That's really kind of at the heart of what I'm trying to teach, trying to write about and teach.
Yeah, being authentic without being curated authentic, where it's completely scripted and everything, that it needs those rough edges, those raw moments, to be truly authentic rather than the scripted authentic.
I'm putting my fingers up for those who are just listening to be authentic, right? Yeah, you don't want to be quote authentic. You want to actually be authentic. I might need to find a better word to describe what I'm looking for, but I think rough edge is getting there. So I was talking to my therapist recently, and I was talking about this idea of core values, right? And I have like a pet peeve because core values is one of the topics in my book, and I have this pet peeve about like integrity as a core value, because I'm just like, come on, man, isn't that like table stakes? Like, if you don't have integrity, should you even be in business? And what does it mean to live for the core value of integrity, right? It just drives me nuts. And then she told me something that blew my mind, which is she said, almost every core value gets tested. And values really find their meaning when they're challenged. And I was like, that's that kind of friction. And I mean, I think we all can relate to the idea that our greatest learning in our lives of when we've been most uncomfortable and we've had the most friction and we've had to like find our way through it, and often change ourselves. And all story has friction in it, right? Conflict is what they call it. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like not a story if there isn't friction. And it's not a value, I would say, maybe if there isn't friction too. So I think in the end, core values are really about how we live, how we behave. And the way you can identify core values is through examples from your life when you've lived in a way that like, where you were like in flow and was feeling great, or moments in your life where you were, at a peak and you just at a trough and you knew that something was wrong, and describing like what were the core values that were either honored or betrayed in those moments. And then once you've identified those core values, looking for like catching people doing good, like looking for moments where those core values are lived, and then just highlighting those and turning those into the mythology inside of your company. So it's very much core values are very much of the storytelling exercise.
I'll tell you a story about some of our core values, just because you're bringing it up. But when I first started practicing law, something that I would notice a lot of attorneys do is they would tell lawyers get great stories, in part because we find people at their lowest moments. So I was talking to a friend of mine who does criminal defense, and she was telling this story, and it was just not very flattering. And I thought, I wonder if this client would want me to know this about them. And so that's why dignity is one of our core values. But it made me laugh because integrity is also one of our core values. But I'll tell you why. I'll tell you, there's a story there, which is when we decided to kind of circle up the wagons and create, a mission statement, core values, and those kinds of things. I had been through a really bad partner breakup, and the partner that left displayed zero integrity in a number of things. And so it just became important to me, like, okay, this is where we got to start with everybody we bring onto the team, right? Because that was problematic in a big way. And so again, it's not necessarily the value that doesn't matter so much as the reason why it's there in the first place. So I value what you said. Yeah.
So you have a little bit of a friction story around integrity, and I totally get that because you're a lawyer.
Yeah.
I don't work with a lot of lawyers intentionally. No, I totally think integrity should be a core value if you're a lawyer.
All right, I don't work with it intentionally. It's always an accident when it happens.
Oh my God, it's like they're two, and this is probably something I shouldn't share, but here goes. there are like two professions where the bar is really high for me to accept them as clients. And it's realtors and attorneys.
Oh man.
Oh, that's hilarious because I focus on commercial real estate and he's a lawyer.
You don't hate me. Oh, I just really screwed up. Like I keep walking into giant piles of dog poop, insulting your core values.
It's good. It's
profession.
No. But I like what you said about your conversation with your therapist, and you're like, well, wait a second, this is why they matter. It's the story behind it, which is your whole thing today is, because I agree, like, it's the same thing with authenticity, right? Like integrity is the same thing, unless it actually means something because of a specific reason.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead, Warren.
And you give it
funny.
just really quick, and you give it meaning through story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. And I'm just going to interject. So I recently did a brand strategy for a developer, a commercial real estate developer. And initially one of their core values, they were like, oh, we want to be, have our core values integrity. And I was like, well, why? Everybody should be honest and, forthright and those kind of things. And the reason for them, their big reason was because they were direct and candid, and their goal was to uncover the problems that were on a site during development so that the owner wouldn't have to waste money on fixing problems that could have been solved 6 months ago instead of waiting for those problems. And so, just as you said, there's a story behind the why of that particular core value. And it's one of the lesser values. There's others are direct communication, being transparent, being forthright. And so all of those boil down into that base unit. But it is the stories that we share that drive those particular interesting moments.
Yeah, here's what I would say. I think this is what's known as a meaningful language problem. In other words like unique, authentic, integrity, I would throw in like honesty. Like these words have been corrupted, or they mean different things to different people. And so what you need to do is just make sure that there's a clear and shared understanding of the meaning of the word. And it's interesting when you're in a change I took, course, I was trained in change leadership. And there are two things you need in times of change. One is the will, right? People want it. If they don't want it, they won't change. And that's where friction is really useful, or what they call the burning platform, the sense that what you're doing today isn't going to work in the future. And then the second is meaningful language. Just like make sure that everybody is totally clear on what you mean by, the future state. So I think you can absolutely use integrity as a core value. And sorry again for insulting you.
No,
but just make sure that everybody internally can like see when integrity is happening, and they can use the core value of integrity to guide their decision making and their hiring.
Yeah, I love, what you said about the meaning behind it, what that means. And I'm a fan of linguistic ideas. And, if I say the word dog, I'm going to see a different dog than you are and then that Jacob is. So what, is developing that shared meaning is vital to any kind of business. And that's where that story comes in, is helps us to define that meaning between all components, your audience, your employees, yourself, and your business.
I just think you ended the podcast episode. That was brilliant.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic conversation.
Thanks,
I've
Dan.
really
Yeah,
enjoyed talking to another marketer about AI. We've had various different professions, and having a marketer with a journalist background, this has been fantastic. Yeah.
We've had fun.
Well, AI Explorers, if you enjoyed this chat, this discussion as much as we did, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.